and it's my great pleasure to be talking to you today to Damian Serbu. Damian lives in the Chicago area with his husband and two dogs, Akasha and Chewbacca. And if I remember rightly, Akasha is the queen of the damned. Is that right, Damian?
It indeed is.
It is. Yeah. And he goes on to say, the dogs control his life, tell him what to write, and threaten to eat him in the middle of the night if he disobeys. We've all had pets like that. If you have pets, you know they are the masters of the house. And he goes on to say his love of gay vampires led to his series, The Realm of the Vampire Council, which is now into 5 books. And he's also got a dark satire Christmas story, couple of stories out called Santa's Kinky Elf and Santa is a Vampire. And you can find Damian on Twitter at Damian Serbu, and you can also find him on the web at www.damianserbu.com. But as ever, we'll have all the links in the YouTube page. Anyway, Damian, good to be speaking to you.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, let's start where we, the last of the books I mentioned, the Santa is a Vampire, because this is one of those things that we tend to forget now, but there used to be a dark side to Christmas and Santa Claus, and indeed the Krampus and various other European traditions is that Santa rewards the good, and he has a little helper who will sometimes very beastly punish the bad.
Yeah, well, and that aligns with a lot of fairy tales from long ago, right? The fairy tales, people think of them maybe too often now as Disney movies or something, but fairy tales used to have a really dark side with what would happen to the children if they disobeyed. And I think there was always an element, well, not always, but there had been an element of that with Christmas. So not that Santa is a vampire is necessarily, trying to do that same kind of thing, but it is in that vein of there can be a darkness to Christmas. And it's funny because some of my fellow horror writers and I were chatting at the end of October about how there's this perception that the genre of horror or the idea of dark stories is limited now to October. It's like we come out of mothballs in mid-September and people will talk to us in October because it's fun, and then we're supposed to disappear or something, or that people that enjoy the horror genre somehow only read it during October. So it's fun to think about how it pulls into Christmas and different traditions about that. And so, yeah, and I think the origin of my story, Santa as a Vampire, was just from when I used to kid around with people like, there's kind of a darkness to Santa. He just appears. You really don't know what he's up to. Everybody just trusts him to come into your house. How do you know that's all on the up and up? Yes. And and from chats like that, I just started thinking, and I'm a vampire fan, obviously. So I started to think, well, what if he's evil? What if he's a vampire? And the other thing I like about that book that's a little different is that in my other vampire series, they're more of the contemporary vampires where some of them are really evil, some of them aren't so evil, some of them are good, and there's like a mix of things. And I enjoyed writing this because Santa's just bad. He's just evil. And in that book, vampires are not a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, there have been a few movie attempts to depict evil Santas, and there's a European movie called Sint or Santa Claus, and that has particularly evil Saint Nicholas swooping in and then merges with the usual serial killer killing all the young teens type thing. But it is a tradition that we think we miss a bit. I mean, likewise, there used to be quite a strong tradition, Dickens is the classic, of ghost stories at Christmas.
Yeah, and that was one of the notes I made when I was thinking about this in preparation to talk with you, is that whole idea that, I mean, Dickens's story, which again, we've made it into, it's like every year downtown Chicago, one of the theaters puts A Christmas Carol on, and it's pretty popular. But if you read the novel, I mean, it's dark. I mean, part of it is the ghosts of Christmas past is brutal. I mean, he's being threatened with death. Like there's a dark side to the Dickens story.
Yeah.
And I think that fits with this, with this too.
Yeah, indeed. You've got Santa as a vampire, and you've also got Santa's kinky elf, Simon. Yes.
Yeah.
Is that a sequel or?
That is actually a prequel.
A prequel.
My publisher was doing a little Christmas series, and they were supposed to kind of be little mini love stories. And so we decided, well, they asked me if I could do like it's more of a novella to lead up to, because that was coming out in November, and then a few weeks later Santa's a Vampire was coming out. So that was a prequel. And well, this is like, this if you read the novel, that Simon is trying to expose the story of Santa Claus. So this was like his early attempt to expose what's happening in the novel, and try to, all of the elves are in the book are captured. They're captive elves to Santa. They were regular human beings, and he found them for whatever reason and turned them into elves. So Simon underground is trying to expose the truth about Santa. So the Kinky Elf story is a prequel, and he's in Chicago, and Santa is trying to manipulate him into giving Santa better publicity. And in the process of it, he meets a guy, and he likes him, and knows he can't really have a relationship ever because Santa's going to come back and take him back to the North Pole at some point.
Yeah. Any plans for any further ones on that series?
I said this one kind of started out because I used to joke about something. And then when people asked me about this, and especially the people that enjoyed the humor in it, that they've asked, well, are you going to write a sequel? So I used to joke all the time that, sometime I'm going to write the sequel and call it The Easter Bunny is a Werewolf. But actually, so now I really am writing that one. Yeah,
right.
I'm in the middle of it.
Right. Yes. The Werewabbit. Yes, indeed.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Not something you'd want to encounter.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Before we go on with the rest of them, any other book projects you're working on?
I'm writing the next novel I finished writing, and I sent to my publisher to see if they're interested in writing the next novel in my vampire series.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the next step, I hope. As I mentioned, I'm in the middle of writing the Easter Bunny is a Werewolf, and then I have a couple other projects. One that just kind of popped into my head. I've never written anything science fiction alien-ish, but this story has been rumbling around in my head. I don't even have a title for it yet, but I started scribbling away on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things you talk about and say you are very keen on is the concept of the gay horror field, or queer horror field, whatever is the term you prefer to use on that. How big a thing is that?
It's pretty big now, bigger than it ever used to be. For a long time, it hid in the shadows. I suppose that's a apt metaphor for a lot of the history of queer life. But like when I was, this is like in the dark ages, when I was in college.
So long ago.
Yes, exactly. So like in the 90s, it was hard to find something that was gay horror, like a gay vampire. I think that's one of the things that attracted me to the Anne Rice series so early, was that even if her vampires weren't always explicitly gay, there was certainly that subtext to them, that feel within their relationships. So it used to be a lot more difficult to find it. But I think as with a lot of things with LGBTQIA culture coming to the forefront and being more open and out, it's created different industries within literature in different places, so that there are a lot more options for horror fans. If you're a lesbian, you want a lesbian kind of horror story, gay man with a horror story, trans horror stories. I think there's a lot more diversity in the field. I've noticed. And then the other thing is, I think the quality has gotten better because early on, if there were movies, quite often when they made movies, you could tell they just didn't have a big budget. The story could be good. It could be your typical kind of horror movie, doesn't always have, great plot to it. That's not always the point. Yeah. But you could just tell it was low budget. And I think the quality is better, and the diversity of offerings is a lot more diverse.
And I think obviously we're making a distinction here between the exploitation type movies, because I mean, right, for a long time we've had lesbian vampires, but that's purely for a heterosexual audience.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or where the gay character does something stupid and gets killed in the first 5 minutes. That's right.
Yes.
That's not the same either.
Yeah, exactly. Do you see there is that these books are breaking out into the wider crossover market? I mean, if it's a good story, it's a good story. And I mean, we can all read science fiction novels where all the protagonists are alien creatures, and we don't sort of think, oh, that's weird. We sink into it. I mean, it should be the same, if it's a good story, obviously, it should be the same with horror, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think that too is happening. I think that there's more and more of a recognition that good literature is good literature, and the storyteller, and it's not just about LGBTQ characters, it can be different races, women. I think there's a lot more of an acceptance or an understanding that, hey, this is a good story and I want to read it. I found it, for me personally, with Santa is a Vampire, people are drawn to, if the people who really like it are drawn to the humor in it. And it definitely has, this is probably, Santa's Vampire is probably the darkest story that I've told. But it's also funny because Simon is a smartass and he gets in trouble with Santa all of the time because he's saying things. And I found that story in particular really appeals to a wide audience. I think people that enjoy the concept of something funny at Christmas, but with a little tinge of horror, just something different, has really appealed to people. So I do think we're getting closer to a world where that the character's identity is important to the character, important to the story, but maybe not essential to the reader that it matched them explicitly or exactly. And I think that's important for everybody to hear different voices and see different voices when they read.
No, and I mean, it's a good point you make about the racial aspect as well, because I mean, you can go through most horror and science fiction books up to relatively recently and never encounter anybody other than white middle-aged men.
Yeah, and I think the horror genre in writing for a long time was really dominated by white men. So I think the diversity there is rich. And the other thing it does is that it brings different possibilities and experiences to the stories. Recently, one of the most famous horror movies is Get Out.
Yeah.
And the racial element there is central to it. And that's a powerful story, not just because it's well written and not just because it's horrific, because it is, but it also then kind of imbues it with this social message that's important as well.
Yeah. Do the bookshops now start putting those books in separate categories or mixing them up? Are they appearing in the, or?
I think more and more what the bookstores have been doing is kind of, I don't know what the term is, so I'll just make something up, like they're decategorizing it, or they're
Right.
stripping away some of those categories that they used to have. And so again, for example, like a LGBTQ section, they may not have that exclusively anymore. And my book would be in with the horror novels, or
which is good, which is where it wants to be. Yes. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Now, just going back to the vampires again, what do you think is the attraction of the vampire? I mean, it's been a part of modern fiction since the early 19th century and continues to be. And nobody fantasizes about, it might be nice to be Frankenstein or something like that, or be a werewolf, because there's an awful lot of downsides. But the vampires seem to have a glamour about them, don't they? Is it the sort of capturing eternal youth? Or
I think that's a big part of it. Eternal life, that they somehow have transcended death, that they've overcome it, and they don't have to worry about it in the same way that mortals do. But I also, vampires have a different kind of mystery because of how they often blend in the stories. And so you're having Dracula's over for dinner, or he's in your neighborhood, and he seems like a really nice, little eccentric foreigner. What's this really like? What's to fear here? So I think that adds they tend to be a more suspenseful kind of horror writing than, say, a slasher film or something that attacks people and leaves carnage behind. They leave dead bodies behind, but it's more of a tension, because you wonder, who is the vampire and where are they coming from and what are they all about, and how do they become a vampire, and am I susceptible to that? So I think that's part. And I also, vampires more and more, there's a sex appeal to them. I don't know if werewolves are sexy, maybe to some people, but not in the same kind of way that a vampire is, with their power. And I think power is an element too with vampires. They have power. And the concept of like putting yourself in the shoes of the vampire and having that kind of authority over people is fascinating as well.
Yeah. Are you contemplating any other moves in the horror field? We talked about Frankenstein, but there are any other areas that you think, I'd really like to have a go at that, or that hasn't been done well recently? I wonder if we could put a new spin on it.
I have one story that it's hard to talk about, because the whole concept would be, as you're reading it, you don't know who the narrator is, or you don't understand the position of the narrator. And in this story, the evil entity is an elf. And the elf is mad because they're building houses in his forest, and he doesn't want people in these houses around. So I'm kind of exploring that as like, okay, I've never written like about an angry elf, like gnome kind of creature. So I think that would be fun to explore. And then the whole idea is that the narrator knows about him, but most people don't. So the narrator is trying to alert people, hey, this is dangerous, we might be in trouble here. But of course, nobody's listening to him because nobody else believes it. So I've never, a gnome would be fun. I like to explore different areas like that. And like I said, I have this alien invasion story that I've started that I think is going to be a young adult novel. I've only written one young adult novel, which is the Bachman Family Secret. And it's part of the vampire series because the main protagonist there eventually meets the vampires, but it's actually a ghost story. So now I enjoyed writing a young adult. I didn't know if I would or not. The original draft of it that I wrote was not a young adult novel. And then my publisher was like, this is really kind of a tween. And we think it'd be fun if you thought about, pushing this and kind of toning down a few parts and let's make it young adult. And so while I was writing that, then this kind of space fantasy popped into my head. And my brother and I grew up as big Star Wars fans. And he's always criticized me because he's like, why don't you ever write like space fantasy? That's what we loved when we were kids. And I was like, oh, I don't know. That's like too close to home. But I think this is like that. This next one is this alien invasion thing is going to be more like in the genre of a space fantasy, because the thing about sci-fi I would not be good at is all the technical stuff. I couldn't do the hardcore, like sometimes the Star Trek versus Star Wars controversy is Trekkies are a lot more scientific about it. And George Lucas and Star Wars is more like, no, it's just a story. We can, make things up as we go.
Yeah.
I'm much more of the ilk that'll be making it up as I go and not worrying about, well, what would really happen if somebody was floating in space? Like, wouldn't be good.
Yeah. Oh, neat. Oh, that's brilliant. Anything else you want to get off your chest, talk about while we're still
No, there were a couple other there's just one other Christmas story that I thought I'd throw out there. I don't know if you've read it or not or heard about it, but Joe Hill's Nosferatu is really good. And it popped into my mind because they made it, I think it was AMC made it into a TV series. And I think it had 2 different seasons. But that was fun because there you have a vampire, but he's also really into Christmas time, and he preys on little kids and he kidnaps them and takes in the idea is he says, hey, we're going to go to Christmas land and it's this fabulous place. Well, it's not. So that's another more recent story that's originally a novel by Joe Hill and then made into the miniseries that plays around with darkness at Christmas as well. So just to encourage people that like horror, there's good stuff set during the holidays that I think people would really enjoy reading.
We've got that just starting now, haven't we, with Marvel, with the Hawkeye series, which is pitched running up to Christmas, which is an interesting take on it as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Well, Damian, it's been a delight talking to you. Thank you ever so much for your time today. And good luck with the elves and the aliens, the vampire Santas.
Right. Thank you. It was fun. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, drop a comment below, and support us by hitting that subscribe button. For more weird tales, visit our website, www.urbanfantasies.com. Until next time, stay well, stay weird.